In the movie Idiocracy, Mike Judge imagines a world where the stupid inherit the earth. In this scenario, it's because the smoother brain types procreated recklessly while the sensible, practical PhD types planned and waited for the right time to have a kid, a right time which never came, leading the dumb to simply out-reproduce the smart, until the world was a crumbling husk of deteriorating infrastructure, toppled buildings, and dead crops watered with electrolytes. It's become something of a meme in recent years to say that this movie belongs in the documentary category, what with the world kind of feeling especially stupid lately. But while Judge's premise for how the world got to be this stupid is maybe a bit flawed and smacks of eugenics a bit, it does speak to a potential great filter that might threaten advanced civilizations, one where the civilization's technology outsmarts the civilization. This is usually depicted as a Judgment Day scenario, where the computers and the robots turn sentient and revolt against the humans, forcing them into servitude or simply eliminating them entirely before turning the universe into paperclips. But that's not how civilizations fall. It's rarely overnight. It's usually long and drawn out, and regardless of external forces, usually made possible by neglect from within. Meaning if our technology overtakes us, it likely won't just be because they got smarter, but because we also got, well, dumber. Here in the United States, we just finished another school year, and the kids are off for summer, or whatever passes for summer these days. These are kids that were raised with an iPad in their faces. Digital natives, for whom the ability to access all the world's knowledge with just a couple of taps is second nature. They can't imagine a world where the answer to any question they might have can't be found right in their pocket. And yet, they go to a school every day, usually at ridiculously early hours, and have the greatest source of information the world has ever seen taken away from them, and told that they need to just remember things and read books. I imagine this must be a very bizarre concept to them. You know, memory and computing, this is a solved problem. It's all just out there, in the ether, in the cloud, if you will. Like, there's no way that they could retain as much information in their heads as they could hold in their hand in any given moment of the day. Like, what a step backward this must feel like. And not to even mention that by the time they graduate, AI technology and robotics will have advanced to the point that there'll be very few jobs for them to do. So I'm sure the question gets asked all the time, why even learn things anymore? It's kind of a valid question. Now, before I make the argument that the education system is going to have to fundamentally change in the next coming decade, I should probably start by pointing out that the current education system, the way we've been doing it our whole lives, it's not very old. The whole idea of compulsory school, of making sure that everybody has like a baseline level of education, that is a very, very new concept in the grand scheme of things. For most of human history, education took the form of apprenticeships, where people would learn a skill or trade by working underneath a master of that trade. And that was if you were lucky. Most people just toiled in the fields and rolled around in the mud. But even if you did become an apprentice, you learned how to perform that trade. Maybe some business and financial stuff around it, but you didn't learn much outside of that. You just didn't need to. Yeah, blacksmiths, farmers, weavers, millers, miners, woodworkers, architects, doctors, and scribes. Like, the whole role of the scribes was to capture and share information, and because of that, they were pretty much the only people that knew how to read. Even most kings couldn't read back then. They had all their correspondence, taken down and read to them by their scribes. And as time went on, literacy became a bit more of a status symbol amongst the royals and the nobility. It was a class thing. So, institutions of higher learning became a thing after that. But it would take hundreds of years for the idea of general schooling for everyone to become a thing. I bring all this up because it's starting to feel a little bit full circle when you think about it. Because once upon a time, we offloaded the maintenance of knowledge to a privileged class of people. And now we're starting to do it again to technology. We used to not learn things because that knowledge was irrelevant to us. Now we don't learn things because it's ubiquitous. Like, knowledge used to be power, now it's everywhere. Now, some might argue that the purpose of school was never really about educating the population, it was about creating skilled workers. It's about having people just smart enough so they can work the machines to keep the economy going, or to make weapons to make our enemies go all explodey. But even that is increasingly under threat. Like, robots have been encroaching into our factories and warehouses for decades, but now we're starting to see, along with an explosion of AI, an explosion of humanoid robots that are designed to be easily trainable to do anything we can do. We'll talk more about that later, but what we're seeing right now is both knowledge jobs and manual labor jobs facing major disruptions at the same time. So if you're a kid in school, or maybe an adult who wants to go back to school, what exactly are you supposed to do? How do you prepare for this? We're facing a literally unprecedented situation, where really the only place to look for any kind of guidance is science fiction. Returning to our original premise, let's look at the movie Idiocracy. Just in case you haven't seen the movie, the main gist is that our main character, who happens to be named Joe, gets frozen and then kind of accidentally forgotten. And he winds up waking up in the year 2505, so 500 years in the future. And when he wakes up, it turns out that the average IQ has fallen so much that he is now the smartest person in the world. His character, by the way, he was in the army and he was chosen for this experiment specifically because he was basically the most average person in the world. So yeah, average Joe, who is now not so average. So the movie spends a lot of time portraying a world where everybody's gotten so dumb that nobody can run the machines or the computers anymore. Everything is a dystopian mess, and it's just kind of basically a big send-up of popular culture, kind of a reductio ad absurdum statement on how dumb our society is today. What they don't spend a lot of time on is explaining how the economy works in this scenario. People do have jobs. Dax Shepard's character is a lawyer, and a terrible one. There are hospitals and police and baristas at Starbucks that provide a little happy ending with their caffeine. And don't get me started on the waitstaff at Fuddruckers, or what it becomes. So people do work, and they're obsessed with money. So it seems like in this world, they didn't quite come up with the AI and robotics technology to put everybody out of work. It does seem to be based on a capitalist system where people have to work for money. And somehow the company stays afloat even though everyone's incompetent. In fact, the only part of the movie that really gives any kind of a hint into what the economy looks like in the world of Idiocracy is when Joe, as the smartest person in the world, convinces them to use water on their crops. So again, for anybody who hasn't seen the movie, there's a company called Brondo that makes this energy drink that's kind of like, I don't know, it's like a mix between Gatorade and Monster Energy drink, and it's what everybody drinks all the time. And they've been drinking it for so long that in fact, when Joe asks for some water to drink, they all look at him like he's crazy because water's what you put in the toilet. In fact, they bought into the whole Brondo thing so much that they use it to water their crops. And they do so because, according to their marketing, it has electrolytes, which is what plants crave.
But Brondo's got what plants crave.
It's got electrolytes.
What are electrolytes? Do you even know? It's what they use to make Brondo. Yeah, but why did they use them to make Brondo?
Because Brondo's got electrolytes.
Anyway, it turns out the electrolytes in Brondo was building up in the soil and killing the plants and was threatening a famine, so he convinces them to use water instead. And this turns out to be disastrous because it causes Brondo's stock to go down, and they wind up firing everybody, which is a problem because apparently literally everybody works for Brondo. So it's depicted as an inevitable future where one corporation runs the world and everybody works for that one company. And this is similar to the movie Wall-E. In Wall-E, the world is run by one company called the By and Large Corporation, who have completely trashed the planet, leading humans to escape to giant luxury liners in space, the main ship being called the Axiom. In this world, humans have basically become nothing more than consumers. They're infants, really, is what it comes down to it. They sit in floating recliners all day long with a screen in front of their faces, just like the mobiles that, hang over babies' cribs and whatnot. They just consume entertainment all day long and buy things off of the endlessly personalized ads, which are obviously inspired by social media. Now, there is some debate around exactly how the economy works on the Axiom because everything on the ship is automated, robots perform all the necessary labor and whatnot, but people aren't just given everything, they seem to have to pay for it with ship credits. Now, how they accrue these ship credits, I'm not sure. I don't know exactly what you would call a system like this, but a user on Stack Exchange put it like this, and I think it explains it pretty well. It has aspects of post-scarcity combined with basic income of some sort, but it's not socialist communist as there is a sense of property ownership. The resources aren't communally managed and there is no labor involved. Now the Jetsons have an interesting take on this, and I've always pointed to the Jetsons whenever we talk about like robots taking over all the jobs and stuff like that because, we all want to live in the Jetsons world, but nobody wants to make the changes that would be necessary to live in that world. By the way, quick aside, the Jetsons came out in 1962, literally like just a few weeks after Kennedy announced the goal of landing on the moon, which I find crazy. The Jetsons were basically a future version of the Flintstones, and it only ran for one season, 1962 to 1963, with a brief revival in 1980. The old nostalgia circuit. Also, and I'll get to the point here in a second, I'm also blown away that of all the live-action remakes of animated movies that we've seen over the years, I cannot believe they've never done the Jetsons. Seriously, how cool would that be? Yeah. The Jetsons features a family consisting of George Jetson, Jane his wife, daughter Judy, and his boy Elroy. and their dog Astro. It's basically just designed to pipe a bunch of bad space puns into our heads. Now, being that this was conceived in the early 60s, the social dynamics are a bit outdated.
Women drivers, that's the problem. You know what you need is a wife to do your cooking.
So yeah, George flies into his job every day at Spacely Sprockets while his wife tends to the home and, spends all his money. Although she doesn't have to do a lot of tending to her home because they have a robot housekeeper named Rosie that does most of the housework. So yeah, George still commutes to work every day and struggles to find parking even though his car folds up into a briefcase. They couldn't conceive of remote work back then, even though they do have a video phone. So in this world, people still have to work, but George only has to work a few hours a day, which sounds great, but he's apparently pretty miserable in this job because, a trope of the time was this hard-ass boss always on his case threatening to fire him. So robots do most of the heavy lifting in this world, and human work is basically just involves pressing buttons, but it still upholds the standard of the 60s, with the nuclear family and the father being the lone breadwinner. And even though he only works a few hours a day, he's able to support a whole family and live a middle-class existence. So while it's never really explained in detail, probably because they were too busy coming up with space puns, one can assume that in this scenario, George gets some percentage of the robot's productivity shared with him. This imagines a world where the company uses robots to do all the labor, and then the spoils of that labor are shared with the employees. I may be talking out of my butt here, but I kind of feel like this points to the ethos of the post-war era, where people were expected to get a job and stay there for all of their working years and build up a pension that they can later retire off of. I feel like there used to be more of a sense of shared responsibility between the employer and the employee back then. But I wasn't around back then, so again, I may be pulling an Ace Ventura here. But when I say that this is a future that everybody wants, but nobody wants to make happen, what I mean is, people have been saying for decades now that automation is a good thing, because it makes each person far more productive. But that's only a good thing when that person gets a share of the profits from that productivity, Otherwise, it's just a cost-saving measure from the company, and people wind up losing their jobs, which is pretty much what actually happens in reality. Because ultimately, companies are more beholden to their shareholders than they are to their employees in our world. Now, exactly how they make this work in the fictional cartoon world of the Jetsons, I'm not sure, but we've only got 38 years to figure it out, because the Jetsons takes place in the year 2062. But maybe the most obvious depiction of a post-scarcity society in science fiction is, of course, Star Trek. There's an entire book on this called Trekonomics, which I have not read, but I encourage you to check it out if you're interested in this whole thing. But in Star Trek, the whole system of people working to produce things that people can buy, I'll stop that now, that's all totally out the window, because they've got the replicator. If you happen to have been living under a rock this whole time and have no idea what a replicator is, it's kind of like a molecular 3D printer that can just basically make whatever you want. In Star Trek, the governing body, the United Federation of Planets, they do away with currency completely. People don't work so that they can make money to keep a roof over their heads. But they do work. Yeah, for a civilization that has no money, people seem really busy. But in Star Trek lore, people don't work for money to acquire wealth. They work to feel a sense of purpose, as Picard explains in Star Trek First Contact.
The economics of the future is somewhat different. You see, money doesn't exist in the 24th century.
No money? You mean you don't get paid?
The acquisition of wealth is no longer the driving force in our lives. We work to better ourselves and the rest of humanity.
This sounds great. Also, naive? Like in the other examples that I just listed, the focus is really more on the system in place that accommodates for full automation. But in Star Trek, I don't know, it seems to require a much deeper transformation, like effectively turning off everyone's natural instinct to consume and hoard. Like in Wall-E, people are just turned into consumers, but in Star Trek, consuming is not a thing. Yeah, in Star Trek, that natural human ambition that's basically led us to wreck the planet so far, that's been turned away from material possessions and wealth and toward personal fulfillment. Value is placed on meaning and purpose instead of external things. Which again, that sounds wonderful, and I mean, I don't know, maybe in a system where literally anything that you could possibly want could be created with the push of a button, maybe the whole concept of wealth falls apart, and that natural drive for purpose, pushes people inward. Maybe it's just a natural consequence of that. But there is also something kind of yikesy about a society where everyone's natural impulses have been, rewired or redirected in the way that the state deems appropriate. In fact, you could argue that the Borg is kind of like the flip side of that post-scarcity coin, when that sort of collective thought is taken to the extreme. Now, I know many of you are Star Trek fans, and there is a lot of lore in this universe that I'm leaving out. So yeah, anything that I missed or anybody that thinks that I'm wrong, just go school me in the comments. But yeah, however you slice it, that sort of Star Trek collectivist utopia seems impossibly far away considering where we're starting from. I mean, unless we have a complete and total breakdown of society and have to, rebuild everything from scratch. Also, there would need to be some technology to happen so that replicators could be a thing. Because right now, we seem to be more heading toward the whole one or two corporations running everything model. Now, whether that turns out to be more like WALL-E or Idiocracy remains to be seen, but we better start thinking about it, because shit's about to get real. Yep, the robots are coming. So we've all heard about the Tesla bot, we've seen the acrobatics of Boston Dynamics' Atlas robot, but these machines are progressing fast. So I did a video a while back about humanoid robots and why it's a different thing from the kind of robots that have been used in manufacturing and stuff for a long time. I was personally questioning why humanoid robots would exist at all. Why do we assume that the human form is the perfect form? And you can go watch that video to see what the entire argument turns out to be, but what it basically boils down to is that it's not necessarily that a humanoid robot is a higher performing robot than, say, an assembly line kind of robot. It's just that we live in a world that is designed for this form factor, basically. So the humanoid robot is basically designed to function in a world that has been designed around what we look like. So if there's any kind of robot that's going to wind up taking over human jobs, it's one that works and functions like we do. And there's a lot of interesting humanoid robots on the way. We can start with the Atlas robot. So Boston Dynamics has been testing out the Atlas robot for years. You've seen all these videos where it's juggling and dancing and doing flips and all kinds of crazy stuff. Well, that was all a hydraulic robot. This new one is an all-electric robot. And by the way, that original Atlas was kind of more of a tech demonstrator, more of an R&D platform. This one is actually designed to be sold and put into work in factories and stuff. They just revealed the new electric Atlas. This one video is the only thing that we've seen, but it's pretty mind-blowing, so there's not a whole lot of info about it right now, but we do know that they're set to be used in a Hyundai plant. Hyundai actually owns Boston Dynamics. So it's going to get some real-world use pretty soon. Sanctuary AI is a company we haven't heard a whole lot from, but their Phoenix robot has possibly the most dexterous hands with 20 degrees of freedom. It's based on an AI robotics platform called Carbon that they had created separately a few years back. And they'll be pilot testing it with an auto parts manufacturer called Magna, who is an investor in the company. Another super impressive robot is from a company called Figure AI. It's the Figure 01 robot. And this is sort of OpenAI's entrance into robotics. It's based on GPT-4. And when it talks to you, it talks in an eerily human way.
Great, can I have something to eat?
Sure thing.
Great. Can you explain why you did what you just did while you pick up this trash?
On it. So I gave you the apple because it's the only edible item I could provide you with from the table.
And in February this year, they raised $675 million from investors including OpenAI, Microsoft, and Jeff Bezos. And they expect to be piloting it at a BMW plant by the end of the year. A rather unique entrance into the humanoid robot sphere is 1X Technologies and their robot called Eve. Unlike others, this one is not bipedal, it's actually on wheels, so it rolls around everywhere, although they are working on a bipedal version that will be coming out later. This can be controlled remotely or operate autonomously, and it's been working in some warehouses since 2019. And this is the first robot that's actually on the market and available to buy. I think they sell it for around $16,000. And of course, there's Tesla's Optimus Gen 2. While this hasn't actually been put to use in any factories or anything, it's getting close to field tests, and Tesla obviously has plenty of factories that it can put it in. Elon suggested that they would go on sale in 2025, but let's not hold our breath on that. While it's definitely more trendy to dunk on Tesla these days, I've got to say I'm actually really impressed with what they've been able to do with this robot in such a short amount of time. And last but not least is a company called Apptronic and their robot called Apollo. This was developed at the University of Texas in Austin, and it's actually had some involvement with NASA. They plan on maybe using this in some space situations. The company's CEO claimed that it could be useful in, quote, construction, oil and gas, electronics production, retail, home delivery, elder care, and countless more areas. And Mercedes-Benz plans to put them in some factories starting this year. Okay, so what does all this mean exactly? Like, do we need to be worried about this or not? It kind of depends. I think depending on what kind of person you are, it's either an existential threat that's going to doom us all, or it's going to be the greatest thing that ever happened. The author Tony Seba recently chimed in about the humanoid robots thing on his website, Rethink X, and he's got a lot to say about it. So Tony Seba, if you don't know, he's somebody who talked a while back about autonomous cars and the EV revolution and stuff. He points out oftentimes in his talks how automobiles completely displaced horses between 1907 and 1922. But his point in this blog is that we are the horses. He talks about the humanoid robot revolution as being a disruption that's caused by the convergence of a few different factors, one being sensors, computer hardware and software, actuators, and battery technology. He predicts that humanoid robots will have a cost capability of $10 an hour by 2035 and under 10 cents an hour before 2045, and will eventually approach zero. And you may see some of those videos and you think that they're clumsy and they're awkward and everything, and they are, but they're quickly getting better. I mean, keeping in mind as always that they are the most expensive and least capable they will ever be right now. But even if they are like half the speed of humans, the fact that they never get tired, they never need brakes, that gives them an automatic edge. In fact, on assembly line situations, they might never run out of power because they could just probably plug in wherever it is that they're standing. Also, robots can collectively learn. So if one robot gets taught a certain thing, a different way to sort things or whatever on an assembly line, immediately all the other robots will know how to do it. So something he suggests in his blog post is that this is basically going to turn into a production arms race amongst countries to build this robot labor force. So this is going to be sort of a force multiplier in terms of how fast this stuff gets adopted. Now, in this blog post, he paints it mostly in glowing terms about how this disruption will also fuel disruptions in energy, transportation, and food. And with birth rates declining, robots can kind of take over for a shrinking labor market in the long run. And he suggests that it might be more of a soft landing. It's not going to be a really immediate thing, that for the next couple of decades, robots will probably just supplement humans, kind of doing the jobs that we don't want to do, filling in the gaps in the labor force and whatnot, before, eventually just replacing us in the labor market altogether. Meaning we kind of have a couple of decades to figure out how we're going to do this, but it is going to take a completely new rethinking of economics as we know it. So we've heard about universal basic income, talked about it a million times. There is a new twist on that Sam Altman from OpenAI kind of put out there recently. He talks about universal basic compute. He suggests that in the future, as AI kind of takes over all of our cognitive, load for all the work that we do, that instead of sharing money in terms of universal basic income, we would share in the computational processing that goes on. So universal basic compute. Kind of insinuating that computing will become currency. And I feel like whether or not you think this is a good or a bad idea depends on whether you trust those at the top to, find solutions that work for people and not companies. I fully understand any skepticism of that, but I say it all the time. I think things are probably going to get worse before they get better because we've got to figure something out, and figuring things out takes a little bit of time. And all I know is that what we're operating on right now is not going to be sufficient in a couple of decades. Talk amongst yourselves about that. But anyway, let's just put the existential dread part of the video behind us and say we do figure it out at some point. Let's get back to the original question. Why learn anything anymore? I say because people will still be people. Yes, many people will be complacent and be happy with never having to know anything. That's true now. That's always been true. But many people, many of you included, I'm sure, if you watch this channel, many people are curious and they hunger for knowledge and they'll seek out understanding of things, even if there is a simpler way out there to get that information, Many people are skeptical and need to see things for themselves. This has also always been true. So regardless of what happens to society, there's always going to be some people out there who just want to learn things, who experience the joy of disparate knowledge, who revel in the ephemera of it all. And honestly, that might be like the guiding principle of this channel when it all comes down to it. I just think that life is more interesting when you know things. That random information that kind of just gets into your brain over time, they start to connect with each other. It just makes life more fun. It makes life more interesting to have all those little connections in there. Like, it kind of makes me think of emergence theory. You know, that knowledge isn't just about memorizing a bunch of stuff. It's about making connections between things that you've never made a connection with before, you know? The human brain, after all, it's just a collection of cells. And it's how these cells connect with each other that makes the magic happen. That's why it's called a connectome. You know, an ant by itself is nothing, but millions of ants working together can create a sophisticated society and build megastructures. You know, and pieces of information in your head work the same way. It's just all random information. It's only when those pieces of information connect that you get ideas and inspiration. And ideas and inspiration are exciting. You know, they make life interesting. They give you aha moments where you have to rethink everything you thought you knew. They can give you purpose. And that's the greatest precursor to happiness and longevity, having a purpose in your life. So maybe in the future, the education system will pivot to reflect that, you know, teaching kids how to think more than what to think, how to be critical of the information and misinformation that they receive, and encouraging nerding out on things. It might be based more on connecting the dots and finding inspiration in things. There's a quote by E.O. Wilson that I think sums this all up pretty well when he said, quote, "We are drowning in information while starving for wisdom. The world henceforth will be run by synthesizers, people who can put together the right information at the right time, think critically about it, and make important choices wisely." So maybe eventually education will shift to focus on that. So yeah, why bother learning things? I would say because you're planting seeds. They'll later sprout into passions and interests that you never knew you had. And that's really important stuff. One passion that I have is saving time, and that's why I only spend 2 minutes a day preparing my lunch and dinner from today's sponsor, Factor. Yeah, in the future they may have replicators to get your food faster, but today Factor is about the closest thing to it. Factor is a meal delivery service where you can tell them how many meals you want each week, what kind of meal plan you want to be on, like calorie smart, vegetarian, keto, you name it, and they send you a box with pre-made restaurant quality meals that heat up in the microwave in only 2 minutes. It's like ordering from a meal delivery app, except it takes less time, costs way less money, and the best part, I think anyway, they're actually healthy. Factor chefs work side by side with dietitians to craft meals that are not just delicious, but low calorie and hit your target macros and all that stuff. They also use fresh ingredients from family farms, and they're not frozen. Like, trust me, I hate frozen dinners. They're always weird textures and freezer burn and whatnot. Factor's got none of that. They've also got delicious breakfast and gourmet options if you're just too good to eat like the rest of us plebes. And don't get me started on the smoothies. They're just the bomb.com, .org, .net. They fill me up, they get me through my day, I enjoy eating them, and it keeps my waistline in check. So yeah, I mean, there's not much more that I could ask for. Now, you've probably heard me mention Factor before, and if you haven't tried it, I don't know, maybe you're the skeptical type. Whatever, I respect that. But if you're curious, there's a special deal that might get you to pull the trigger. If you go to factor75.com or click on the link down below and enter the code JoeScott50 at checkout, you can get 50% off your first box and 20% off each box for the next month. 50% off, guys, that's like half off. Math. I really think you'll like it. They're a sponsor I actually pay for, personally, because I became a huge fan of it, and now you can try it for a huge discount. So one more time, because if you don't repeat it, they just delete it. Click on the link down below in the description, or just scan the QR code here and enter JoeScott50 at checkout. You'll get half off the first box and 20% off your next month of boxes. Give it a try. I think you'll like it. Anyway, I want to hear what you guys think about the whole humanoid robot thing and why we should learn things and whatnot. What do you enjoy learning? Talk about it down in the comments below. Please do like and share this video if this is the first time you've ever been here. I'm so glad that you found the channel. Thank you, algorithm. Maybe you can check out this video. They think that you might like it, and I think you might like it too. But I'm biased. It's me. But if you did like it, please do give it a thumbs up. It kind of helps to get it in front of more people. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel before, maybe check out a few other videos. And if you like them, give me a subscribe, because I come back with videos every Monday. Anyway, that's it for today. You guys go out there, have an eye-opening rest of the week. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Love you guys. Take care.